you need to be experienced. I say 7+ years of fundraising experience. There are consulting opportunities where you can do it without that much experience. And there are like lots of different areas where you can go. But if you want to be a fractional, you have to have the strategic experience to really fulfill that promise.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here again with my friend, Cindy Wagman. Cindy, welcome back to What the Fundraising.
Thank you so much. I love having conversations with you, and even better for your podcast listeners. So thanks for
I
having
know,
me.
I'm so excited. I feel like this is like in sort of the new iteration of the work that you're doing. And so I'm so excited for you to tell everyone about what you're up to, what's going on, and then we can dive in.
Yeah. So what am I up to? Over the last couple of years, sort of have been transitioning to focus on the role of fractional executives in the nonprofit sector. So, specifically, I actually teach fundraisers, experienced fundraisers, how to start consulting as fractional executives. But I'm on this sort of broader mission of just having these conversations and thinking critically and differently about the role of consultants, of human resources in our sector, and how we can do things differently in a way that is win for organizations, specifically for me, small organizations, 'cause those are the ones that are closest to my heart, but also to the people who work in them.
Yeah. Okay. So there's so much here. And one of the things that I want everybody who's listening to this, if you are not already following Cindy on LinkedIn, you should be, because what we're not going to get to really capture today is just, I feel like the way you thread a nuance needle through all of this, like, and really hold the balance. Like when I'm going to be so honest and
Yeah.
transparent for the first time ever recorded. But when you first started doing this, honestly, I had this like drop in my stomach at first around like, I hate that our sector needs this, right? Like, not that fractional executives aren't everywhere and there isn't a role for them. I use them in my own business. I think that's so important. But I think part of the problem that you're solving, I wish wasn't a problem.
100%. 100%. In some ways, I think its growing popularity in our sector is an indication of a broader problem that we're not entirely solving. But I also think like it's a yes and, which you know me, I love a good yes and or both answer. And I definitely think we should all be talking about how we treat people, how we compensate people, all of that. Those are the deeper underlying problems. And at the same time, fractional executives is also growing in popularity outside the nonprofit sector. So there's some other things that I think are still really valuable to organizations where we can pay people well, treat them well, give them time off, balance, flexibility, and still have a role for fractionals. So I'd love to see both. And I think that they, as always, to me, good things uplift good things. So hopefully, in the growth of this movement or popularity of fractional executives, we're also shining the light on some of the problems that need to be fixed.
And I think you do such a good job of that, of acknowledging that and providing a solution for like the moment that we're in, which I think is really important for us to be able to hold that balance of like, it is, we need to address why we are growing this need. And also, we are growing this need. So let's solve this problem in the organizations that are struggling right now. So can you break it down for folks who maybe are new to this type of conversation? Because I dove right into like the
Yeah. What
juicy
is
middle.
fractional?
Yeah. Can you back up and just sort of explain a little bit about fractional and then also like who you think it's right for and maybe who it's not right for?
Yeah. And I definitely have thoughts. And I will preface this by saying I still feel like we're a little bit in the wild west of fractional executives in the sense that I have my definition. I've been doing this work for a number of years and I worked with probably 70 plus nonprofit fractionals. So I speak from that perspective, but I'm not saying my definition is the only definition. So I'd love, and I think it benefits everyone for us to have a shared understanding of what fractional executives are and what they do. So I'll give you mine and hopefully it makes sense to other people. So the way I think about it is when we look at who to hire, the first thing we think about is like, what do we need? And then immediately after or simultaneously, what is our budget? And usually the budget is the biggest constraint, right? And it prevents most organizations, but especially small and mid-sized organizations, it prevents them from hiring the skill level and expertise that they actually need to have in their organizations to meaningfully alleviate some of the stress and responsibility from an executive director. And so, what fractional executives are basically, we can call them C suite, so fractional CFO, fractional CMO, or director level experienced people, but you're basically hiring them for a fraction of their time for a fraction of the cost. They're not staff. So you manage them, and the relationship around management is different, where you're not really hiring someone to just delegate all the work to. You're actually hiring someone who can be a thought partner with you as a leader and who almost is telling you what they're going to be doing and who's going to be driving the strategic direction and implementing the work. So typically we think, okay, we're going to hire someone full-time in-house. They're inexperienced. We have to delegate. We have to teach them all the things. That doesn't work out that well for most organizations, small organizations. Typically consulting, we think, okay, someone's going to come in and give us advice, and then we have to do the work. And sometimes that's really helpful, but in small organizations, sometimes we need more hands on deck, right? And so those are often the options we look at. And fractional is this really beautiful sort of in between. We're not sacrificing the strategic oversight or the implementation.
Okay. And I remember you and I having a conversation about this. I can't even remember which one, where that piece around kind of the way in which a fractional fundraiser set boundaries or expectations can actually have this really positive impact on the organization, not just in terms of the work they ultimately accomplish, but also in sort of requiring that the organization get really clear on their priorities. And both of us have been frontline fundraisers, particularly in small, organizations. And so we get the like, oh yeah, here's your priority list, but every week you also have this other priority. And it can make it just so impossible in that position to take action, to not feel horrible about all the balls that are being dropped. And you don't necessarily feel like you're in a position of power to sort of push back and say, we actually need to get really clear, because you're like, well, I just want to do whatever is being asked of me to do. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh, yes. So part of how I came to this was from my experience in my early days of fundraising. So I so distinctly remember all the experiences I had where I was doing things that were not a good use of my time. So I'm a fundraiser. I've always been a fundraiser. My first fundraising job, like, I would go to a conference, learn from like the best fundraisers in the world about how to write a fundraising appeal, and come back, write a beautiful 4-page appeal. And the chair of the fundraising committee would take her red pen and cross out all the stories, cross out at the time, and think still, like, best practice was 4 pages. It was like, this is way too long. It needs to be a page and a half. We need more stats, like all the things that were wrong, like just flat out wrong. But because she was on the board and chair of the fundraising committee, I was like, okay. And then, of course, the board was like, we need to write a letter to Oprah. And I wrote a letter to Oprah. We need out-of-home advertising campaign to raise awareness about our organization, this small little women's shelter in North Toronto. And I'm like, do we though? But I ran it because that's what happens and it's ironic for an organization that's so strapped for resources, we often spend a lot of time and resources wasted on things because someone at the top doesn't understand, but they think they do, and they're nervous or what have you. And so they just they don't know how to manage in this case, fundraisers, but so many other functions too. And so that was my experience very early on. And at the time, I didn't have the experience to push back. I didn't have the voice. I'm like, I don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't want to do anything. I'm talking to these senior people. And so this shifts that dynamic. But I also think role models, as you said, for organizations, how we can get really clear and focus and let go of some of the things that are actually not that meaningful. But we need strategy, we need the experience, which is one of the things that's really hard to hire for in small organizations because we don't have the budget.
And and not even just the expertise or that, it's like we need the restraint. I mean, truly, like in my last role at an organization, once I finally found my version of alignment fundraising, I was working 15 hours a week and raising way more, 4 times as much as I had been raising at the beginning of that. And it was like, you don't need me full time,
Yeah.
actually. Like I can raise the whole thing in 15 hours a week. But I was sort of ruthless in my prioritization, in my, only really like kind of high impact activities. And that can be a really, really hard thing to do when you're a small organization and you're still in that scattered space of like, gosh, I have done everything under the sun from like selling chocolate to like coffee, whatever, like
Cookbook.
subscription campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Which also comes up. The thing that's really interesting, I'm curious what you think about this, is that I feel like a lot of those strategies are actually our ways of inadvertent, like accidentally fundraising or like inadvertent, right? It's like we don't want to actually really ask people for money.
Oh,
So we're
yeah.
going to create this whole way where we get 17%
Yeah.
of the outcome of this thing that takes so much time and energy, but we didn't have to ask someone directly for money. And the fractional fundraising piece really flips that on its head, not just because it's somebody who's highly skilled telling you, here are the high impact things, but I will do that.
Yeah. Oh, the biggest thing, and you will appreciate this because your book and all of the thought leadership that you do is around like what we think and feel about fundraising. And 100% those are avoidance activities that look busy, but don't have good results, but they don't feel as scary and threatening to us if we're not fundraisers, if we don't have that fundraising experience. So yes, that comes up a lot. So I have taught, as I said, I teach fundraisers how to start their fractional fundraising business. And this comes up over and over and over again. And I teach the consultants this because without a doubt, organizations like, but we shouldn't reach out to donors, you know, like mindset out the wazoo. Just like overwhelmingly, that is one of the biggest underlying problems. That and kind of going back, because this idea of focus, part of it, what we're seeing in the sector as a human resource problem is that when people leave, we just add more work to the people who are there. And so we're overworked, we're unfocused, we're trying to do all these different things. And at the end of the day, everyone's trying to avoid fundraising to begin with. And so it just leads to more and more burnout and a cycle of really wasted money because what we spend time on and what we resource, like what I saw over and over again is small organizations would hire that junior fundraiser and they'd last for like 8 to 12 months because the organization was like, why aren't we raising money? Well, you're selling cookbooks and holiday cards, not actually asking for money. And the junior fundraiser they have feels like garbage because they're not getting results. They don't have someone meaningfully manage and lead them. And so that's like 8 to 12 months of someone's salary gone with no return. So I saw this cycle over and over again with small organizations. And that's how I started doing this work. When I started consulting, I was like, this is the problem I want to solve for. So yeah, it's very cyclical.
Okay. All right. So now I'm going to ask maybe an unexpected question. So I think the value of, somebody who's inside a fundraising role in an environment that is not taking care of them or they don't feel like they're able to take care of themselves, the jump to becoming a fractional fundraiser seems very nice. And there's many that I have had many times where I'm like, oh man, I wish Cindy's program was around when I started I'm like, three
Same.
clients, like, holy moly, like, I want that program. And we will tell people everywhere they should go if they are in house thinking about wanting to become a, consultant, fractional fundraiser, because you have so many great resources out there and a really cool quiz also to help people kind of identify. So we'll drop all those. But I'm curious, like, for folks who, like, I'm curious what you think from your perspective around the changes we need to make inside shops to really be able to sort of identify, okay, like, here's a great example of no matter, it's not about sort of a toxic workplace, or it's just like, this is a great example of where a fractional fundraiser could take an organization to a particular place. And then yes, your goal is to bring in a healthy, full-time fundraiser for that role versus like, and then what do we do to keep those folks, or are there things we can do to keep those folks in their roles and not miserably? Like, I think as sad as I am by the growing desire for this, I'm not, my goal is not to keep people unhappy and
No, right.
miserable and suffering in their roles. Of course not, right? It's like, and so I'm just curious, like, some of your thoughts there.
Yes. So, and this goes back to the yes and, which is there are organizations I feel very strongly are best suited for fractional fundraising support. And then there's a lot of like square peg and round hole situations. So to me, I always focus on who is this right for? Because it's not a perfect solution for all these other issues. The organizations that are going to best benefit from a fractional fundraiser in particular are ones where they have some budget to hire, right? They're looking at, we need to hire someone to help us with our fundraising implementation, but we don't have a budget for a senior level position, right? So we're probably hiring at that junior level, but our executive director and other leadership, we don't have fundraising expertise. So there's no strategic oversight of that position. Those two things combined, and usually there's no one else fundraising. Sometimes you can have like a fundraising admin or like, the kind of like general admin who does some fundraising support, donation processing, that kind of thing. Some organizations might have a couple fundraising staff members, but to me, that's a little bit off that like core perfect fit. Really, it's like you don't have anyone doing fundraising. You have some budget, like you need to grow your fundraising. You want that growth, and you don't have the strategic oversight in house to make a meaningful investment in someone junior without that much experience. That to me is the perfect, call it a ladder. So in my ideal world, it's not a bridge between like point A and point B. It's really a ladder. You're getting the organization to a place where they eventually can hire in-house, but they have the budget and the resources and the history and track record where they can hire that senior level position without worrying about who's going to supervise them and all that kind of stuff. So that's the sweet spot for me where fractional fundraisers in particular can really shine.
Okay. All right. That makes a lot of sense. So for folks who are in-house, or even folks like who have been doing consulting, but in a way that doesn't feel really sustainable. I mean, truthfully, like when
It's
it's
hard.
very funny, like me, but like there have been so many times where like people have said, oh, like, did you become a consultant because you wanted more flexibility? And I'm like, you have no idea what my calendar looks
Yeah,
like.
like
Yes,
I'm
you do.
working 24/7.
I mean, and I went from a job where I was like doing the whole job in 15 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
So I went from like maximum flexibility to actually a very rigorous, like,
Yeah.
building this. And so I'm actually thinking maybe about those folks, like which types of consultant who maybe have been doing it other types of ways is this really a great fit for?
So again, specific to fractional fundraising, I say this is, first of all, you need to be experienced. I say 7+ years of fundraising experience. There are consulting opportunities where you can do it without that much experience. And there are like lots of different areas where you can go. But if you want to be a fractional, you have to have the strategic experience to really fulfill that promise. So that's the first thing. You have to have the experience. It's right for you if you like the sort of hybrid of strategy and implementation. So a lot of consultants, and I used to think this was consulting where like we give advice, right? I tell you what to do and you go do it. And a lot of people go into consulting when they're kind of near retirement and they don't want to do the hands-on work. They want to just dish out advice. That's great for so many organizations, but often that doesn't translate to small ones. So if you're a fundraiser, fractional means you are still doing the day-to-day work. I often think of it as like you're a good fundraiser and you don't want to get caught up in like all the, politics and stuff of in-house. You just want to show up and do a good job. Like you can do it and you just want to focus on doing the good work. So that's also who it's good for. And then it is stable. So you work on like the way I teach it, you work on 12-month retainers. You charge 4 to 5, sometimes more $1,000 a month per client. So you're fully booked, you're making 6 figures. It's again, like you're not constantly doing business development. That like whole hustle culture that I felt was really around in the pandemic. Like that's not what this is. And I do see a lot of fundraisers or other consultants who do project-based work or fundraising plans. They often will add something like fractional to their service model just to give them that sort of baseline stability. Just to say, okay, and I have a number of people in our network who do this. So like, I'm going to work with 1 or 2 fractional clients, and then I'm going to also do these other cool projects or things. So that works well too.
Okay. That's so, yeah. So, okay. I love what you said at the very beginning around experience, because I think it's so interesting in our space. Like, I feel like you and I have both been like very transparent about like we're used to being in the small nonprofit space, or, I get questions all the time about like capital campaigns. I'm like, yeah, I've never run one of those. And like, sort of really trying to be explicit about what I have and haven't done. And sure, we can be curious and have conversations, but I do feel like one of the dangers that we're seeing in our sector right now is like people going straight to consulting or having 1 year and some strong opinions and going into consulting, and that there isn't a lot of like, it's one of the reasons I've been an advocate for coach certification and like hiring certified coaches, because I think there's, when you're in sort of an unregulated, like environment, it can make it hard and people get burned by consultants all the time. And
All
then
the
it's like,
time.
I don't want to work with, like, we don't want to hire another consultant. And it's like, oh my God, like, it's like tech trauma. They're like consultants in our
100%.
sector. Yeah.
100%. And so, like, again, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I only have 1 or 2 years of experience, work in an agency. Like, go work somewhere where you can still consult and get experience. But there is a lot of bad experiences with consultants. And I will say, also with the consultants who have like 20, 30 years
Yeah.
experience too, it is not, that piece is not specific to experience. And I always ask myself, like, how can I help? Right? Consulting is not just like, what's in it for me? Yes, it's nice. I get more control over my time. I get to decide how much I work, how much I want to make, who I want to work with, which is a big one. But at the end of the day, my business, my consulting business is only going to be successful in the long run if I'm actually doing something meaningful for my clients. If I'm building a reputation where people know that by hiring me or my small agency, that it's going to be good for them, right? It has to be impactful. And that's why we all get into the sector. But I do feel like sometimes people go a little bit adrift just because our sector can work in weird ways sometimes. But yeah, the experience piece, and I'm not saying you have to be 60 years old to consult, because that's another big myth. Like I used to think, like I had that experience that I think so many people have where I was in house as probably around my late 20s, early 30s, and I was in an organization I was a director level, but the board, we were all like a bunch of old white dudes. And they're like, they brought in this other consultant to come in, and he basically said exactly what I've been saying. Like, I'm like, why did you just pay this guy all this money? I've been saying this for months. Right. And so we've had that experience too. And I think
Totally.
that you don't need to be 55, 60 years old to consult. I started consulting when I was 35. I also started consulting. My older son was about 3 years old, and the younger was maybe 9 months old. And I started with basically, I didn't call it this at the time, but I started with a fractional client, which gave me the stability because I needed to make money. I'm a significant contributor, probably actually the primary earner in my family. And I couldn't take risks with that stability that we needed. So you can consult when you're younger and all that, but you have to have the experience to be able to deliver the results and impact, because otherwise, what the hell? There's like, you're building something on like shaky
Yeah.
ground. Yeah.
Totally, totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yes, and I really appreciate that clarification around like the only bad consultants are not new consultants. But I feel like it's important, like just like the self-awareness. And it's not even about being bad, right? It's about being honest about where our expertise is and isn't, what we have the capacity to do and not do. And I think one of the things I really like as we're having this conversation is that I feel like a lot of people become consultants because they don't like asking people for money.
Oh,
And I always really like when people are asking, like, how should I evaluate hiring a consultant? I'm always like, get clear about their comfort asking for money. And not because like in California, we have regulations where I can't make direct solicitation. So I can't do it, but you'll notice it in certain advice or things like that. And it's like if the consultant is afraid or deflecting or suggesting things that are kind of roundabout ways to raise money, that's a sign to me that they're not going to be the empowered, like, shepherd of a fundraising plan that really prioritizes the elements that are critical to your success. And so, what I really like about the fractional model is that because they are doing the work, they didn't go into this so that they can stop actually doing the work.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So you have an upcoming conference. This will be the last thing I could talk to you forever. Tell us about it. People are going to sign up right away. We'll drop the link, but tell me where they should go.
Yeah. So the conference is called Fractional Shift, and it's for nonprofit fractional executives. So anyone who is in our sector who's either running a consulting business doing fractional work or curious about running a consulting business doing fractional work, and that's fractional fundraising, fractional CMO, CFO, HR, all the things. COO, you can sign up at nonprofitfractionals.com. It's on January 14th and 15th. And that leads into the enrollment period for my program called the Fractional Fundraiser Academy. And if you go to fractionalfundraising.co/waitlist, you can join the waitlist for that. We enroll people twice a year. And it sounds really cheesy. I love the program. I love the community. I love everything about it. And so if you're curious, join the waitlist. I'm sharing information. We have a private podcast where we interview alumni from the program. So if you think this could be for you, those two things, sign up. And if you want to hire a fractional fundraiser, because that's also really important, fractionalfundraising.co/inquiry. I have like an intake form where I will match your organization with someone from our network who I personally have trained. So I know that they understand this fractional model in the way that I've described it today. So I'm happy to make introductions.
Amazing. Oh my gosh, Cindy, thank you for everything that you do for our sector and all the ways you lift people up, consultants and fundraisers and organizations. I'm so grateful to have you in this ecosystem, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. And for all of those things, because you also uplift people and champion people and speak for what's right in our sector. So thanks, Mallory.